So essentially the meditation at the beginning of the day is going to be the same, sort of, more or less throughout the course, certainly throughout this module. So I'm going to talk through it a bit today, but as we go through, we can just sit in silence and then do the prayers at the appropriate point. So first of all, take a few moments to check your posture. Is the heating on, by the way? Potter could have it off because for the meditation. Well, is anybody cold?
No, really warm.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we don't want to be too warm while we're meditating. So make sure that your sitting position is comfortable and stable and the back is straight. And take a minute or so to just come inside your body and be aware of any tense muscles or discomfort in the body. And take a minute or two to just gently relax each muscle. Let the body settle into a very comfortable, relaxed state. If you wish, you can scan through the body slowly from top to bottom, just noticing where there are tense muscles. And as you breathe out, just release that muscle tension. As you let go of physical tension, you can also begin to let go of any mental tension, stress, anxiety. Just let those thoughts settle gently by themselves as you breathe in and out. And just focus the mind on the flow of the breath entering and leaving the body. Whenever the mind wanders away onto a train of thought, just let go of the thought, park it for now. Don't need to follow the compulsion to follow the thought through. Bring the attention gently back to the breathing. And just do that silently for a few minutes. And take a few moments to recall and reflect on your motivation for being here and for embarking on this course of study and practice of Buddhism. So I know most of you have had quite a considerable amount of experience of Buddhism, and we are taught what is the correct motivation, but it's good to connect this up with your own experience, your own original reasons for wanting to explore Buddhism, for being willing to devote time to studying and practicing Buddhism. So really try to make it real for yourself. This is why I am here. And of course, as we are practicing within the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, also give some special attention to whatever motivation you have that is related to benefiting others. On a deep level. So if you consider yourself to be a Buddhist, then in relation to those aspirations, your own goals in the spiritual path, that means that you have chosen to rely on the teachings of the Buddha and on the spiritual community that holds those teachings. So take a few moments to reflect on refuge. On the qualities of the Buddha, his spiritual qualities that make it true that he is a valid and reliable source of refuge. We can place our implicit trust in the path shown by the Buddha in his life and teachings. Those teachings, to some level or other, we have examined for ourselves and verified that they are sound and valid. Therefore, we can safely entrust ourselves to that path. and those down the ages who have passed down those flawless teachings, the spiritual community, the Sangha, those who have put the teachings into practice and realized them. Also, we can and need to place our trust in those. And so in the space in front of you, at the place where the statue is on the shrine, visualize that Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha, is sitting in front of you now with a radiant golden coloured body, wearing the 3 saffron coloured robes of a monk, seated in the full lotus position of meditation, with his left hand holding a golden begging bowl, right hand touching the ground in front of his right knee, and seated on a lotus, on top of which is a red sun cushion and a white moon cushion. The lotus is on top of a golden and jewelled throne, supported by 8 white snow lions. If you have a relationship with a spiritual teacher, guru in this life, you should think there is no distinction between Shakyamuni Buddha and my own root guru. It's the same mind, just appearing in this particular form in front of me now. And the Buddha is looking down at you with a radiant smile of compassion. He has complete, perfect wisdom, understanding all objects of knowledge, both conventional and ultimate. He has limitless great compassion for all sentient beings. His sole purpose is to lead you and all other sentient beings to complete freedom from suffering, to the bliss of full enlightenment. He has complete insight into your own situation, your own mind, and understands perfectly the best path for you to follow to attain enlightenment. So with a joyful mind, we will recite the Refuge Prayer, page 21. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. And the Buddha is extremely pleased with your generating the mind of taking refuge and the mind of bodhicitta. And visualize that the throne dissolves into the lotus, which dissolves into the sun cushion, which dissolves into the moon cushion, which dissolves into Shakyamuni Buddha's body. He comes towards you, becomes smaller, turns round and comes to rest on the crown of your head. Again, remember that Shakyamuni Buddha is none other than your root guru. If you have not identified a living guru in this life, just think that Shakyamuni Buddha himself is your personal teacher. And vividly imagine that he's actually there, seated on your head, in a body of golden light. His body dissolves into the golden light, which flows down into your body, down your central channel into your heart. This golden light, the essence of Shakyamuni Buddha's holy mind, fills and pervades your whole entire body and mind. Your body becomes very light and pure. Your mind merges with the holy mind of Guru Shakyamuni Buddha. You experience deep peace and bliss. Your mind absorbs into emptiness. And just rest for a few moments in that spacious, blissful, empty awareness. Well, good morning. I hope you had a restful evening and good sleep and wide awake and ready to go. I just want to say two small things, one about time and one about money. So it's time and money, isn't it? Some say that time is money, but I'm not entirely convinced. So just about time, we do have quite a lot to get through. There's a lot of material in each of these modules, and so I would like to ask you to be sort of quite prompt. So I've asked, Jenny's kindly volunteered to do the bell. So she'll ring the bell about 3 or 4 minutes before each session. And if you can try to be in at the times that are on the timetable, then it gives more value. You get more from it. So we have allowed quite long breaks. I'm quite open to any feedback about the timetable. There's no such thing as a perfect timetable, but if any of you find any difficulties with the timetable, you've got any suggestions, we won't have debate and discussion in the class. But if you just talk to me in the breaks, then I'm happy to hear what thoughts you have about that. I'm not going to give another long lecture about money, but just to say these forms about becoming a friend they're on the table out there. So if you're considering that, please do have a look. And I think that there's some deliberations about the friend scheme. I understand. So well, Jenny said that there's can I think send a reason. That's not current. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Because what I was going to say about it is, I think the director and trustees will be looking at this, and there might be an increase in the suggested amounts. But one thing important to know about it is that there are 3 levels, and at the moment the levels are £12, £20, and £30 a month. So at the middle level, you get free the evening classes are quotes free. It's in quotes because it's only a suggested donation anyway. But it's like, you feel that you are kind of covering that, if you like. And then at the higher level of C, there was a 50% quotes discount on weekend teaching. So if you are a friend at the higher level, then you can divide the suggested donation in half.
You're not a friend. Why are you not a friend?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of this course, it would be, if we were following the suggested donations, it would be less to be a friend, I think. But so it's actually to your advantage, but it's to our advantage because then we know we've got that regular income. So it's been very helpful to Jamie to have the friend scheme, and I think we perhaps haven't promoted it as vigorously recently as we could have done, because we have got there's more people involved, but we haven't got many more friends. So please do think about it if that's something that's that's possible for you. Okay, enough of that. Yes, please. Yeah.
Accessing some. Does it mean can you access, say, some of Geshe Tashi's teachings on John Life in London by having the password, or is it just links?
That's a separate thing, Lindsay. So the password, there is a separate FBT website, which is for the online FBT program, and I think that is a password part, so to get access to the materials, and there's a discussion forum on there, which is for people participating in the online program. And I did say that I would discuss with them whether it was okay for people doing this course here to have that password. The other thing is that on there are the recordings of Geshe Tashi's teachings, but I have those, and I feel it's right that you should have access to those. The original teachings, I think, from the first course from 1998 to 2000. the course has changed slightly since then, but obviously it's wonderful to be able to listen to Geshe-la's original teachings on it. I do also have the teachings from the course in Leeds, but I thought it was just really, if people want those, I'm happy to put those on as well, but I just think, you could just get overwhelmed by all the material. So
Just to say, Lindsay, I'm looking at, I've just asked Kerry actually to put a password protected on the Jamia Leeds website.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Yeah, so we'll do that, and we'll look at possibly whether we can have an online discussion forum. We'll do that in some form, whether it's an email list or something on the website or whatever. Sorry, were you going to say something, Fiona?
Do you need your recorder?
Yes, I do. Thank you. And it's actually in my bag there. Yeah, I'd forgotten that. And yeah, I think that's really only. Yeah, bring that because people do ask questions during the talk. So you'll notice that on today's timetable, I've put 11 to 11:45 talk, then tea break, then Q&A. So it doesn't mean you can't ask questions during the talk, but as I said, there is quite a lot of material to get through. So what I would prefer is if there's anything that I'm saying that you don't understand, if you're getting lost, please ask, at the time. But if you have like a more substantial question or comment we'll have that separate Q&A session. And it's 45 minutes, so I really want to kind of open up a big group discussion there. So just to be a little bit restrained. But if you need to ask a question, and at the time where I'm saying something and you're not quite clear about it, then please do ask. Okay. So too many bits and pieces. No, it's all right. It's okay. Yeah, I could put some things on there, I guess. Yeah. Okay. So before we start the talk, we'll do some chanting and we'll recite the sutra. So again, we'll chant the Shakyamuni Buddha's mantra. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it's Tayata Om Mune Mune Maha Munaye Soha. Okay. Tayata Om Mune Mune Maha Munaye Soha. 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 Tayata Om Mune Mune Maha Mahamunaya Soha. Tayata Om Mune Mune 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 Mahamunaya Soha. Sutra recitation. Thus have I heard. At one time, the Blessed One was living in the deer park at Isipatana, the resort of seers near Benares. There he addressed the group of 5 monks. Monks, these 2 extremes ought not to be practiced by one who has gone forth from the household life. What are the 2? There is devotion to the indulgence of sense pleasures, which is low, common, the way of ordinary people, unworthy and unprofitable. And there is devotion to self-mortification, which is painful, unworthy and unprofitable. Avoiding both these extremes, the Tathagata has realized the middle path. It gives vision, it gives knowledge, and it leads to calm, to insight, to enlightenment, to Nirvana. And what is that middle path? It is simply the noble eightfold path, namely right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This is the middle path realized by the Tathagata, which gives a vision, which gives knowledge, and which leads to calm, to insight, to enlightenment, to Nirvana. The noble truth of suffering is this: birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair are suffering. Association with the unpleasant is suffering. Dissociation from the pleasant is suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. In brief, the 5 aggregates of attachment are suffering. The noble truth of the origin of suffering is this: it is this thirst, craving, which produces re-existence and re-becoming, bound up with passionate greed. It finds fresh delight now here and now there, namely craving for sense pleasures, craving for existence and becoming, and craving for self-annihilation. The noble truth of the cessation of suffering is this: it is the complete cessation of that very craving, giving it up, renouncing it, emancipating oneself from it, detaching itself from it. The noble truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering is this: it is simply the noble eightfold path, namely right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This is the noble truth of suffering. Such was the vision, the knowledge, the wisdom, the science, the light that arose in me with regard to things not heard before. This suffering should be fully understood as a noble truth. Such was the vision, the knowledge, the wisdom, the science, the light that arose in me with regard to things not heard before. This suffering has been fully understood as a noble truth. Such was the vision, the knowledge, the wisdom, the science, the light that arose in me with regard to things not heard before. This is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. Such was the vision, the knowledge, the wisdom, the science, the light that arose in me with regard to things not heard before. This origin of suffering as a noble truth should be abandoned. Such was the vision, the knowledge, the wisdom, the science, the light that arose in me with regard to things not heard before. This origin of suffering as a noble truth has been abandoned. Such was the vision, the knowledge, the wisdom, the science, the light that arose in me with regard to things not heard before. This is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. Such was the vision, the knowledge, the wisdom, the science, the light that arose in me with regard to things not heard before. This cessation of suffering as a noble truth should be realized. Such was the vision, the knowledge, the wisdom, the science, the light that arose in me with regard to things not heard before. This cessation of suffering as a noble truth has been realized. Such was the vision, the knowledge, the wisdom, the science, the light that arose in me with regard to things not heard before. This is the noble truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering. Such was the vision, the knowledge, the wisdom, the science, the light that arose in me with regard to things not heard before. This path leading to the cessation of suffering as a noble truth should be cultivated. Such was the vision, the knowledge, the wisdom, the science, the light that arose in me with regard to things not heard before. This path leading to the cessation of suffering as a noble truth has been cultivated. Such was the vision, the knowledge, the wisdom, the science, the light that arose in me with regard to things not heard before. As long as my vision of true knowledge was not fully clear in these three aspects, in these 12 ways regarding the Four Noble Truths, I did not claim to have realized the perfect enlightenment that is supreme in the world, with its gods, with its Maras and Brahmas, in this world with its recluses and Brahmanas, with its princes and men. But when my vision of true knowledge was fully clear in these three aspects, in these 12 ways, regarding the Four Noble Truths, then I claimed to have realized the perfect enlightenment that is supreme in the world, with its gods, with its Maras and Brahmas, in this world with its recluses and Brahmanas, with its princes and men. And a vision of true knowledge arose in me thus: my heart's deliverance is unassailable. This is the last birth. Now there is no more rebirth. This the Blessed One said. The group of 5 bhikshus was glad, and they rejoiced at his words. So we have a little bit of finishing off to do on the first part is of the corresponding to the first chapter in Geshe Tashi's book. We started on yesterday about the Four Noble Truths generally as a whole. And there's a couple more things to say about that, and then I will start talking more in detail about suffering, the first noble truth. So the first point is, and I'm following Geshe Tashi's outlines here. The Four Noble Truths are divided into 2 pairs. Or that says one kind of commentary on the Four Noble Truths, that they constitute 2 linked pairs of cause and effect. Okay, so The first noble truth is suffering. Second noble truth is the cause of suffering. The third noble truth is the cessation of suffering. And the fourth noble truth, the path leading to the cessation of suffering. It doesn't say the cause of the cessation of suffering. We'll come back to that point. But in a sense, the path is the cause of the cessation. And the origin is the cause of the suffering. So we can see this like, I beg your pardon. I'm very sorry. I should be setting an example, shouldn't I?
You're just like that tantric master you were describing.
Oh yeah.
Today, whose beaten thing went off in the 1980s or something.
In the middle of a highest yoga tantra initiation of this very, very sort of exalted, one of the highest, most venerable teachers of the Tibetan tradition. And everyone was looking around in shock. Who's let that? And he, with an absolutely straight face, reached his hands inside his robe, pulled out the thing and switched it up. That was His Holiness Song Rinpoche, one of the most legendary kind of. Yeah, he was very, very tall, and he was 80 years old. Would sit kind of in rigidly upright for 3 or 4 hours at a stretch while he would teach. I remember he would talk for 45 minutes and then say to the translator, "Now you translate." A lot of stories about him. Anyway, I don't wish to be compared with His Holiness, but yeah, there you go. Maybe there's some karmic connection. Right, back on track. Yeah, so 2 sets of cause and effect. But interestingly, they're kind of given in reverse. They give the effect first and then the cause. So why was that? So as I said yesterday, the reason for suffering coming first is like it's not at random. This is in some real sense, this is the starting point of the spiritual path, is the recognition of the problem of suffering. So as I said, everybody knows that there's suffering. And if you ask everybody, is there such a thing as a human life without suffering? Most people would probably say no. So we do know, intellectually, we know that suffering is there and that it is a part of everyone's life. But what is not normally there for most people most of the time is the recognition that the overcoming suffering is the fundamental problem in life. And I think I possibly said this, in a way, suffering is just the flip side of not having happiness, isn't it? It's like you could look at the fundamental sort of we all want to be free from suffering. We all want to have happiness. That's really the same desire in a way. But if you were to say, if the Buddha said, the problem of human life is how to get happiness, we could receive that message differently. Say, oh well, it's kind of like, well, yes, we all want happiness, but at the moment things are kind of okay. So it's kind of optional. Now there's nothing optional about wanting to become free from suffering. If you are suffering, there's no question you want and you need to be free from it. You're really suffering, that is the whole sort of, your whole being wants to be free from it, right? If it's real suffering. The problem is that a lot of our suffering is kind of invisible, it's hidden. It's, we're not experiencing it right now. We're not aware of it right now. but it's there. So it's only when we really kind of begin to go more deeply into this question of suffering that we realize we've got a problem right now. It's not just, you know, when our bank account goes into the red, or when we have to go into the hospital, or when our partner leaves us, you know, or our car breaks down. It's not only those times that we have suffering. All the time we are confronted with a deep problem. Human life itself comes with this deep problem, kind of from the moment that we leave the womb, possibly the moment we enter the womb, you know. There is this, but a lot of the time we can be unaware of it, we can be oblivious to it. So all of you possibly can recognize, I mean, that'd be interesting to hear later on, you know, about what you think about this, but that, you know, you're here today because at some point in your life you realized that there was something, there's a deep problem in life. You know, it's not, things are not really 100% okay as they are, as the way that we kind of go on through life unreflectively, thinking that everything's okay until suddenly there's a problem, and then we deal with that problem, and when we've dealt with that problem we go back to thinking everything's fine. There's a deep problem, and it's people who have a sort of reflective mind who begin to realize that at some point and need to look into these spiritual teachings or something of that kind, because there's a problem I can't actually solve on my own with the knowledge that I have now. I need to make a deep change in my life. And that's where spiritual practice begins. Recognizing that the problem of suffering is much deeper than we ordinarily think. Okay, so that's why that one comes first. And then why does the origin of suffering come next? Well, if what we want is to be free from suffering, if we have this kind of logical, scientific, you know, outlook that somebody mentioned yesterday. It was somebody in your group, wasn't it? Yeah. Talked about that. If we look at it logically, we look at it scientifically, we want to be free from suffering, then we need to know what is producing that suffering, and then we need to look at, can we remove that cause? So that's completely logical. And then the next logical step is, once we remove the cause, you know, is it possible to remove if it is really possible to remove the cause, once we know what the cause is, we need to ask ourselves, is it possible to remove that? And if the answer is yes, then we know that there's a possibility of freedom from suffering, cessation of suffering. But we're still not all the way there, because we know that it's possible, we don't yet. The other thing that we need to know is how to do it, isn't it? We might know that it's possible, we might not know how to get to that. So we can see that's completely logical sequence, and that it's a complete teaching. If we know and understand those four things, we have everything that we need actually to, you know, engage in the spiritual path. All the rest, as has been said, is commentary. You know, that's the essence. All the rest is commentary. Of course, it's very necessary, you know, to look in more detail and understand how, you know, the fine detail of exactly how and why all these things, and all the details of the path, the Noble Eightfold Path, and, you know, that can be expanded into endlessly, actually. But that's the essence. So two sets of cause and effect. And Geshe Tashi comments that, you know, what type of cause and effect is it? With the first pair, the causal relationship between the origin of suffering, craving, or on a deeper level, as we will see as we go through, the ignorance, the basic ignorance that is the cause, or even of that, you know, craving itself comes from, arises in dependence upon fundamental ignorance. So what type of cause? It's not like a physical causation, it's a mental causation, and this is what we mean by karma. Yeah? So it is that mental factor craving which karmically produces suffering. It motivates actions which produce suffering results, non-virtuous actions, and it also in itself, that craving is a form of suffering itself, actually. Now, the causal relationship in the second pair is slightly different, because, as Geshe Tashi points out, a cause and effect relationship is something that applies only to impermanent phenomena. Okay, what do I mean by an impermanent phenomena? Anything that is produced by a cause, actually. But all of the things we can see, touch, feel, taste, mental experiences, in fact, all what we can call manifest phenomena, all phenomena that kind of appear to the mind directly through the senses, etc. So the exceptions are quite subtle and few. It's said that space is a permanent phenomenon. Space is a permanent phenomenon. Space in the sense of the mere absence, as it's defined, the mere absence of obstructing contact. So here we have some obstructing contact, and here where we have air, but assuming the air wasn't there, there's nothing obstructing something moving through that space. So that space, that mere absence of anything obstructing, it's not a positive phenomenon in that sense, is it? And so it doesn't change. The lack of something obstructing doesn't change from moment to moment. Emptiness is another example of a permanent phenomenon. We've had some interesting debates on the last program about what is and isn't a permanent phenomenon. But anything that is produced by a cause must, according to Buddhism, must necessarily change from moment to moment. Okay, so Mount Kailash is not permanent. Although it's been there for 50 million years, it is changing, and one day it will disintegrate completely. So that is the cause of suffering, and suffering itself are related by cause and effect. But Nirvana, the cessation of suffering, is said to be a permanent phenomenon. Why? Because Nirvana itself is the mere absence of suffering. Okay. So now, when we talk about Nirvana, there is Nirvana itself, which is a mere absence. It's a negative phenomenon. So it's it is a permanent phenomenon. But then there is the state of being in Nirvana, if you like, like entering Nirvana, the event when the last trace of suffering and the cause of suffering have to disappear from the mind at the same time. It's fairly obvious, isn't it? If there's any, if the origin, the cause of suffering, of delusion, is still present in the mind, then we're going to be continuing to experience suffering. So, but when that cause of suffering is gone, then there will be no more suffering. So at that point, we've entered Nirvana. The Nirvana itself, though, is permanent. It's a mere absence. It's a very quite a deep topic, actually, what Nirvana actually is. The word Nirvana, by the way, has been translated as something like extinguishment. It's the word that's used for when you blow out a candle. Yeah. So when you blow out a candle, that event of the candle going out is something that has a cause. But the fact that there's no more light, that's not something that's changing. There's no more light coming. See, well, that one's burning, okay, but this one here is not burning. It's supposing I'd blown that one out, yeah. It's not giving out light. It's not giving out light. It's not giving out light. It's not changing, yeah. That absence of light is not changing. So the absence of suffering in your mind after you've entered Nirvana is not changing from moment to moment. Yeah, but the event of entering Nirvana, that has a cause, and the cause, of course, is the path. There are many ways of talking about the path, and we're going to have a complete a day on that at the end, so I won't get to go into that now. 2 sets of cause and effect. How are we doing? Need to speed up. So the last section in Geshe Takshi's book is entitled Being Our Own Refuge. And yes, we haven't talked about refuge in any detail, and I'm not able to talk about it in detail now. But Geshe-la says that, the middle, when we talked about the benefits of studying and contemplating the Four Noble Truths, the second level was that it will cause us to take refuge in the 3 jewels, the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. That doesn't mean that our problems are over because they're going to do it for us. Yeah, and it doesn't mean that we just pray to the Buddha and then the Buddha removes our suffering. Taking refuge in Buddhism, I think, there's a different flavour and a different feel to it than in some religious traditions where it really is, and I'm not criticising those traditions, but where the outlook is more like to place your trust in some divine being who is going to help you. In Buddhism, the emphasis is in what happens in you. So the Buddha said many times, things like the refuge is within you, be your own refuge. Taking refuge is putting the Dharma into practice based on having analysed and examined and understood it and used your own wisdom to discern what it means, and to accept and reject what the scriptures or the teachers say, not thoughtlessly. Anything that is said by the Buddha or in a sutra or by some qualified teacher, we should take seriously and think about. But the Dalai Lama said many times, if there's a conflict between reasoning and scripture, reasoning should take priority. And the thing about reasoning is, you have to do it. Someone else can explain some reasoning to you, but you have to evaluate it. You have to make your own judgment. So as Buddhists, we don't hand over our, autonomy of judgment to the 3 jewels or anything else, not even the Guru. Guru devotion is a very big topic. I will talk about it in the Tantra module, but Guru devotion doesn't mean that you kind of blindly accept everything the Guru says. Refuge certainly doesn't mean that. So, it's our response. Practicing correctly is your own responsibility. Where does that line? The Dalai Lama said that. Yeah, anyway. So we need to be our own refuge. I think we started a little late, so I'm going to go on, 5 minutes over the time and start on the next section. So chapter 2 of the book is, about suffering per se. Shuffling papers here. Right. Sorry. Got out of sequence somehow. There's page 6. Okay. So I've said a little bit, the next section in the book is called Why the Buddha Taught Suffering First. I've said a little bit about that. I'll just say one more word about that. So 2 main reasons that I think, it's similar to what Geshe Tashi said, not exactly the same, but one is that if that's where the Buddha is inviting us to start considering the spiritual path that he's setting out. And he says, okay, the first thing you need to understand is that there is suffering. Well, there's no debate really, is there? Birth is suffering, sickness is suffering, aging is suffering, death is suffering. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair are suffering. Association with the unpleasant is suffering. Dissociation from the pleasant is suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. So there's not going to be any argument about that, really. I mean, if someone doubts that, they're kind of, where do you start? If someone thinks those things are not true, well, we just have to leave them to go their own way, I think. I can't think of anything more certain than that. So that kind of gives you real solid grounded confidence in what the Buddha is saying. Yeah, that's true. So we can start there. Whereas if we start with, in the beginning God created the heaven and earth, immediately we're into a big debate, aren't we? Certainly these days. I mean, maybe 500 years ago everybody just took that for granted, but now, not quite. Again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's absolutely fine, but that's the reason why the Buddha, framed his teaching in that way. It's one reason. And the other reason is that, what I've really said that is, that has to be the starting point, because that is the fundamental problem of life. And again, it's very difficult to kind of, when you put that to you, it's like, well, that's clear, isn't it? Suffering, by suffering we mean whatever is unsatisfactory, whatever, the dukkha, that word is sometimes translated as unsatisfactoriness or dissatisfaction. Whatever, which really means, whatever we don't want to experience is suffering. And we have to recognize we do experience things we don't want to experience. Therefore, we have a problem. So again, it seems like that's beyond debate.
People do debate it though, don't they? And I think, like suffering of change seems to be the stumbling block, because people say, well, actually, I'm not just... I suppose us here might agree with that, but I know loads of people...
Oh, yeah. And when the Buddha taught the First Noble Truth, he didn't mention that. Yeah, because suffering of change actually, and pervasive suffering, all those second and third types, which we'll talk about in a moment, they both relate to the first type. Suffering of change is suffering because something that initially is pleasant turns into manifest suffering, doesn't it? Yeah. And pervasive suffering is simply the pervasive potential for manifest suffering. So when I say it's indubitable, I mean it is the manifest level. That is beyond doubt. Nobody really questions that unless there's something a little bit wrong up here. You know what I mean? There is no suffering in the world. That's kind of, borderline crazy, isn't it? Yeah, so you're quite right, Dawn. Yeah, the second and third types, we need to investigate more deeply to recognize them as suffering. Yeah. Okay. So,
back to the order of the truth.
Yeah.
I heard it said that the model used is the ancient Indian model for diagnosing a disease.
Correct.
So
yeah, and the modern model, there's no difference, is there?
Yeah.
Yeah. What is it? Symptoms, diagnosis, treatment and cure.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah. We've talked about the three. I'm going to change this actually, because in my original course notes, I called them the three aspects of the First Noble Truth, as we were talking about yesterday. Well, Geshe-la calls them the three phases. I'm going to have to stick to that because there is another thing, which is the four aspects. So I'll create confusion if I don't use Geshe-la's terminology. So the three phases, on the first level, recognizing that it is true, that there is suffering. Okay. The second level, what do we do with that truth? What do we need to do about suffering? We need to understand it. That's the second phase, or the second level. And then the third phase is when we have completely understood it. And so in terms of how the Buddha explained it in the sutra, that complete and totally clear understanding of the nature of suffering in all its forms, he's kind of equating that with the stage of enlightenment. There could be a slightly different interpretation where at the level of the path of seeing, where we see emptiness, we see the ultimate nature of reality directly. There is a level of understanding of suffering there, which we could consider that to be the completion. There's a kind of interpretation in terms of the Hinayana path and an interpretation in terms of the Mahayana path. Someone who has attained that level of direct perception of ultimate nature has a completely unmistaken understanding of what suffering is. At the level of Buddhahood, full enlightenment, it's like, he has complete and total understanding of all the suffering throughout the universe without any, nothing missed out. Just slightly different. Pardon?
Just a bit different. That one is just on everybody else's. They'll be for the sentient beings.
Yeah, but both of them are well beyond where we're at.
Oh, yeah.
So moving on to the topic that Dawn brought up, and I'll probably talk a little bit about this, and then we'll have a break. The three types of suffering. So, there are 3, 8, and 6 types of suffering. Especially Tibetan tradition. Somebody said they like lists and numbers, or you're going to have a feast with this particular Buddhist tradition. It's absolutely a limited number of lists. But this one is probably the most important one to understand. The 3 types of suffering are manifest suffering, which is simply what everybody recognizes as suffering. So physical pain, sickness, aging and death, birth. Some people may not be so clearly aware that birth is suffering, but anyone who's experienced it either as a parent or in any form being close to it, that birth involves a lot of suffering. We don't really, unless we're one of those exceptional people who have an extraordinary kind of memory where they can actually remember the experience of being born, most of us don't really, I think, have a full comprehension of how great that suffering is for the child. We can perhaps have a good appreciation of what it's like for the mother if we've done that, but it is, it's talked about in Buddhist teachings in quite a sort of heart-rending manner. It is very, very intense suffering being born, usually. And then the Buddha gives a list: sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair, talking about mental suffering mainly there. Pain obviously physical, but we're very fortunate, most of us here, in that most of our suffering is mental suffering. But that's, it's suffering, isn't it? It's not trivial. Anxiety, depression, anger, and resentment are very, very painful suffering, some of these things, lots of different kinds. So in our society, we kind of, the intense physical suffering is not so pervasive and so obvious as it is in some places in the world. And the mental suffering is a little bit hidden. But as soon as we look below the surface, we find it everywhere. And not trivial, not small things. People, I think this is probably the kind of suffering that is most useful for us. Well, it's very useful for us to meditate on the physical suffering of people elsewhere in the world, and people in our society. There are plenty of people who are suffering physically, obviously. But the majority, it's mainly, in our society, it's mainly mental suffering, and it's a little bit invisible. But as soon as we look and really think about it, it's terrible. It's not minor, it's not trivial. You know, you personally may be relatively fortunate and not experience very much of it, but the people around you, as soon as you start, if they're willing to talk about it, you know, somebody's willing to actually tell the truth about what's going on in their lives, in their mind, and the things that they're worrying about, and the emotional pain that they're experiencing, it's major, isn't it? So there's manifest suffering, and we can talk a lot more about that. But then the second level, a little bit more subtle, suffering of change. This is very important in terms of renunciation. Okay, so by renunciation, what we mean is the level of spiritual motivation that impels us to want to attain Nirvana, attain complete freedom from suffering. Renunciation is realizing, recognizing that all of the ways, the kind of non-spiritual ways, if you like, you know, that we pursue happiness and pursue freedom from suffering through material possessions, etc., you know, these really temporary solutions, they are not. We think that they are inherently in the nature of happiness, and they are not. So those desires just to improve our situation through material things and objects of attachment is what it is, what it really means, you know, through you know, pleasant sense experiences, and it's more complex, I think, with, you know, with personal relationships. But there is, you know, attachment to a particular kind of personal relationship is one of the biggest causes of suffering, actually. And that doesn't mean that, you know, we like attachment to, you know, to sort of chocolate causes suffering. That doesn't mean that eating chocolate is bad, but it's the compulsive desire for it that leads us to use it, misuse it, and create suffering. And it's the same with personal relationships. That, you know, there's a great kind of mixture of motivation, isn't there? And where it is a motivation, we'll look at kind of self-grasping and self-cherishing, where it's based on that, which invariably for most of us there's at least a mixture of that. That creates suffering, but there's an illusion, that chasing after that ideal person or that ideal material object, you know, whatever it might be, is the way to happiness and the way to become free from suffering. And if we follow that, then we experience the suffering of change, because this object that we think is in its nature inherently a cause of happiness, we suddenly find, as we, you know, start on the fourth bar of chocolate, that it's not causing us happiness anymore. It's causing us suffering. And, you know, and we all know the same with all of these kind of objects of desire that are, you know, objects of attachment, desire. So I'm going to be true to my intention to try to be reasonably punctual. Stop there. We'll come back to part 3 later on. So I'll have a break.
Can I just say it's my birthday today, and I put some cake in the...
Oh, happy birthday. Well, I think we should... Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Tim. Happy birthday to you. Very good.
We have cake.
Oh, great. Okay. So it's not suffering of change unless you're attached to it. Okay. Have we got the machine off? Yeah.
David could still do